next set of questions go, I assume. So I'm going to go to Senator Shoebridge, and then I think we might be close to finishing with Asio. So Senator Shoebridge, you have the call.
Thanks very much, Chair. Before the dinner break, I was asking questions about the HWMW case. One of the concerns that was raised by Asio in its submissions was that the attendance of this ADF officer at training organised by the Community Security Group, or CSG, in Israel, and to quote from part of the submission put by Asio, the CSG training could be considered a natural recruiting pool for Mossad, as Mossad would likely be aware of the training courses. Now, I think that was a proposition put by HWMW himself and a concession by him, but it was put forward as in the Asio submissions. Has Asio undertaken any further investigation of such training?
Senator, you'll understand I won't go into in public what investigations we do or don't do. You're right in terms of the potential concern that the individual raised, and that is a potential concern of us. But I want to be clear here on the public record. There's nothing wrong with the community security groups. They perform a decent function, an important function, especially in times like this. Training that they might provide to help provide security to members of the Jewish community is fine. Of course, there is an element of that in some cases it may be the case that training done overseas in Israel might present an opportunity, and my best advice to anyone involved in that is to be public and not hide anything, and everything will be fine.
Well, indeed, just to complete that about this is training that happened in Israel through CSG, the submissions by Asio provided the applicant said he thought that if Mossad saw an individual on one of the CSG training courses in Israel that they wanted or had the skills they wanted, Mossad might offer them a position. Asio assesses that the applicant understood that Mossad has the capability and intent to recruit or use foreign individuals to pursue Mossad's own objectives. That I assume remains Asio's position.
So I'm not commenting on the specific of the case. As I said, though, of course, if you're actually doing such training and you're not being honest about that and not sharing that, that can potentially be a problem for you.
But on the proposition that was put to the tribunal in the Asio submissions, doing this training itself in Israel puts you at risk of being approached and recruited by Mossad. I don't think I'm misreading the submission from Asio. That's what you put to the tribunal. I'm assuming you don't recant from that.
I'm not recanting from what we said. I'm just making the point that I do not want to comment more broadly on the specifics of this, comment on the specifics of the case, but more broadly I was sharing with you the view that the CSG is absolutely fine, training for individuals, the CSG is absolutely fine, and if you're going to do training by organisations, including overseas, you should be open and transparent about that. That's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, in this case, knowing the risk of being, the open risk that Asio acknowledges of this being a very real potential recruiting platform for Mossad in Israel, do you say that continuing people with security clearances doing the training with CSG is fine, provided they disclose? Is that really the position?
I'm saying that is actually really helpful if they disclose. That allows us to make proper assessments as opposed to potentially being misled. And when we find individuals that may not disclose fully the cases, that's going to be a problem for them when we start to wonder why they're doing that.
Well, one of the reasons given by HWMW was that he was encouraged not to disclose by people within the CSG training course. in Israel? That's a problem itself, isn't it?
Sorry, the bit about being told disclose.
Being encouraged not to disclose.
Oh, well, sorry. If that's the case, that is a problem for me, yes. But again, I'm not going to comment on the specific case beyond what we put on the public record. I was trying to be helpful more generally about...
I get it. One of the other concerns that Asio raised was that in this case the ADF officer had attended the first interview with Asio and made an explicit agreement to maintain confidentiality of the investigation and the interview, but then after that disclosed details about not only the fact of the investigation but details of what occurred in the interview to, and I'll quote, the head of the Sydney CSG, and I'm quoting from Asio's submissions here, and HMW told person A, who was the head of Sydney CSG, that he had told Asio about the Sydney CSG among other details of the interview. And in the second interview, the applicant confirmed that he breached confidentiality by discussing the first interview with person A, and further the applicant stated he didn't view it as a breach of confidentiality, etc. Were there any investigations undertaken about what, if any, role that person A had, either in encouraging the disclosure or knowingly encouraging a disclosure that was in breach of the confidentiality obligations?
So you'd appreciate I'm not going to talk about our investigations in public.
Do you know if HWMW is still still a member of the ADF?
I don't know.
No. The series of exchanges, both in Israel but also in Sydney, where confidential information was disclosed in Sydney and where someone was exposed to recruitment from a foreign agency in Israel, do you see that as grounds for Asio undertaking a further review of who may have potentially undertaken these courses, particularly in Israel?
Again, Senator, I will not comment on operational investigations or investigations that my agency has in public. It actually would hinder us to do our job properly.
All right. But to be clear, at a minimum, Asio has an expectation that anyone with a security clearance, if they're attending, whether it's foreign training in Israel or perhaps any third country, they would openly and proactively disclose that to their employer. I assume that's a minimum expectation.
Absolutely. It's my point around transparency is the best here when you're going through a security clearance and holding a security clearance. You should not withhold anything.
Yes. Do you know if the ADF has undertaken any reviews about whether or not other officers have also failed to disclose?
I can't answer that. That's a question you'd have to put to Defence.
And I think I asked you, but I'll just be clear. When was the security, the negative vetting 2 clearance removed? Because as I think I've said, and it's been demonstrated, I think, in some of this questioning, there were very real concerns from HMW. When was the security vetting removed? Because I think, as this questioning has demonstrated, the concerns weren't just at the end of the process. I assume that there's if you like, a sort of protective approach taken to national security interest, top secret material, where you take a kind of preemptive protection action rather than wait for procedural fairness to conclude.
So firstly, on the when did the security clearance end, we have taken that question on notice. Again, not to comment on a specific case, but obviously when we're doing security assessments on individuals, that can happen for a number of reasons. It could be something happens that we're aware of or we get told about that actually kicks off, we need to do a review here. It could be the natural revalidation life cycle of someone with security clearance. In the 7 to 10 year mark, they're up for a revalidation. Could be for a number of reasons. Of course, depending on the reasons, in some cases it can be people are stood down while that review is underway.
Well, even if they're not stood down from their position, surely a precautionary principle in cases such as this, where very real concerns are raised about whether or not access to top secret information is potentially letting a foreign country have access to that. Isn't there a precautionary principle that's adopted?
Again,
Even if you don't stand someone down for their employment, removing their security clearance would seem a pretty obvious precautionary step.
So again, Senator, not commenting on the specific case, but it does depend, and it should depend, because it could be that we have something that we need to investigate. That investigation could lead to, is there divided loyalties here? And we may well find there are divided loyalties, but that does not mean they have betrayed their country at this point in time. And if we have nothing before us that says they have, it may be what we then do and what the employer does actually depends on the circumstances we have before us. It's a case-by-case basis.
But security vetting isn't a perfect art. It's a risk assessment.
Sure, but we don't.
You don't have to wait for someone to breach their obligations to remove their security clearance. It's a risk appetite.
Sure, it's a risk appetite either way, absolutely. And we don't knowingly let highly classified information go out the door. If we had those concerns, access to that information would be stopped immediately. But it's a case-by-case basis.
I've asked you questions about this one incident because it's the one incident that's been made clear to us through the decision that was handed down last week. Are there other jurisdictions around the country that potentially offer similar training and place either members of the ADF or other people with security clearance at a similar or commensurate risk?
I'm not aware of such, but I'm happy to take that question on notice.
All right. Thanks, Director General. You were asked some questions by my colleague about the, I suppose we call it the Daily Terror sting attack, the Daily Telegraph sting attack that happened on the streets of my hometown of Sydney, in I think it was on Enmore Road in Sydney. You remember? I'm sure you remember those questions, Director General.
I do.
And I think you described it as mind-blowingly stupid. And I'd agree with you to an extent, although I think the concerns that many people have is this wasn't an act of stupidity. This was a planned, resourced, approved sting operation to try and sow division on the streets of Sydney. It didn't appear to be stupid. It appeared to be venal and planned and nasty and divisive. And I wonder if you want to reflect upon your characterisation of mind-blowingly stupid, given the degree of planning that media outlet applied to it.
I stand by my comments insofar as the context of which I was answering. The question was along the line of, and my answer was related to, if a media organisation is going to set something up to provoke, to get a headline, that is mind-blowingly stupid. Of course, if there's some sinister, well-planned, plotted, approved from the top of the organisation to do that, I think that is completely wrong, should not happen, and I'm hoping there is something law enforcement can do to deal with matters like that.
Well,
but that's a personal view.
Yeah. Well, in this case, there was photographers, there was multiple efforts to record it, there was a camera person, there was a relatively senior reporter that had been approved by the powers that be in the newsroom. This wasn't an accidental moment of stupidity. This was a planned act of division on the streets of Sydney, wasn't it? And that is more troubling than something just mind-blowingly stupid. A planned act of division by one of the principal media outlets in Sydney is even more troubling than something that's mind-blowingly stupid.
Without having the full details of that case before me, I can't comment. You're asking me to speculate on something that you've drawn a conclusion on. I do not have the full facts in front of me, so I'm not going to speculate.
But I assume part of what Asio is doing is looking at what is causing division and causing the division that you've highlighted in your recent address. When you have one of the principal media outlets in the country actively causing the division, I assume that would have come to the attention of ASIO?
It came to the attention of ASIO, but do I have multiple media agencies doing such things? No. So in terms of the way we need to make priority decisions to put the effort of my organisation, this isn't one of them.
But this is the largest media organisation in the country doing it. This is the largest media organisation in the country doing it.
I don't have the data to tell you which is the largest.
Well, I mean, let's be clear, it was a News Corp. It's not a minnow. It's not like the,
Sure.
you know, this is not the Ballarat Times. This is News Corp doing it. Doesn't that raise the level of concern?
I was concerned by the incident. I think it's totally inappropriate, but in terms of what more ASIO will do at this point, I have nothing before me that says it should get the weight of my agency's attention.
All right. Could I ask you about some of the comments you made about the potential for division having been sourced by overseas actors? I think you've indicated in answers earlier today that I think you indicated, as I understood your answers, that there were 2 occasions in Sydney linked where petty criminals had been used to do appalling acts on the face of it, anti-Semitic acts. Are they matters where there is concern about, does the ASIO hold concern that foreign actors or a foreign actor may have been behind those 2 events committed by petty criminals who appear on the face of it not to hold known extremist political opinions?
So again, I won't comment on specific incidents. The 2 that I mentioned that were connected was in relation to the question from Senator Patterson about previously saying that not all of the major incidents we've looked at we believe are connected and driven by the one person, but I made example 2 were. So that's that. The other aspect of my answer was we have open lines of inquiry about motivations behind these attacks and whether it's a promotion of communal violence, politically motivated violence, or foreign interference. And foreign interference, open line of inquiry, is looking at the question of, is there intelligence that suggests that a foreign nation is driving any of these incidents? That's an open line of investigation for us. Beyond that, I can't comment any further in public.
All right. And is it one jurisdiction or is it more than one jurisdiction that's the subject of investigation?
Our investigations are across multiple jurisdictions.
Often people assume that these threats can come only from countries that are sort of acknowledged as our global geopolitical opponents. Yet we saw from incidents that countries such as India have, for example, engaged in quite vicious attacks on our Five Eyes partners, and I know you haven't confirmed it, but they appear to be the source of some deeply unfriendly acts on shore here. Would people be right to speculate that that the foreign influence is only those countries that are seen as objectively our opponents, or should we be looking also to our people who we might have assumed have been our friends?
From my point of view, it is correct to say that actually foreign interference has come from multiple nations, and some of those nations we consider or are friendly with.
I think one of the concerns you've raised in that regard is a potential foreign government or governments wanting to get access to material acquired by Australia through the AUKUS arrangements, and particularly the nuclear submarine arrangements. Is that a genuine and ongoing threat?
AUKUS is definitely a high priority intelligence requirement for multiple nations. Some of them we consider friendly.
There has been significant speculation that one of the countries targeting Australia for information related to AUKUS is indeed again India. Are you in a position to confirm or deny that?
I won't comment on which countries, other than say there are multiple countries. I can also assure you when we see the action, we take swift action to stop it ourselves or with defence or defence industry partners to prevent that information from being stolen.
All right. And have there been instances of actual espionage or access to confidential AUKUS information that have been brought to your attention? I'm not asking you to identify any of them, but is this just a theoretical threat, or is it a fact that's happening?
So it's a real threat, and we have intelligence to see at the intelligence requirements of these foreign intelligence services and specifically what they're after. So that demonstrates there is active espionage being planned and attempted. Of course, whether or not we've caught it all, because we're not all seeing and all knowing, but no one would be surprised that AUKUS is a priority target for foreign intelligence services, and there are active steps underway to acquire information.
All right. And I assume you're working with the ADF and the Australian Submarine Agency closely to ensure that they are taking all necessary and reasonable steps to protect that information?
It is a priority for my organisation. I have staff working inside Defence and the Submarine Agency, and we will continue to do our part to make sure AUKUS is delivered without compromise.
All right. And have you been alerted to any breaches by the ASA?
I'm not going to comment on real or operational activity. I just can't do that.
All right. Thanks, Director General.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Shoebridge. That's all the questions that we have for you, Director General. Thank you for your